All right, good evening, everyone. This is a public meeting of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of this meeting was posted at the entrance doors of the Education Service Center and on the district website. It was also sent to the West Bend Community Memorial Library, the Daily News, WRYU, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. I'm going to pause to ask Superintendent Wimmer to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We recognize a quorum of our board. We have 6 members present tonight. Mr. Chris Jenkins is traveling for business, but I understand he may join later. In the meantime, with 6, we have a comfortable quorum, and so we are able to proceed with our business. Next, we consider approval of our agenda, which was circulated in advance of this meeting. I would move to approve this agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kelly. We have a motion and second to approve this agenda. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries and our agenda is approved.
I just want to recognize that Mr. Jenkins has joined virtually,
Oh.
so if you just want to do that by roll call.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Jenkins, welcome. You came just in time.
Thank you.
What we'll do instead is what we're going to do is, because Mr. Jenkins is participating remotely, we're going to do our votes by roll call. So thank you, Superintendent Wimmer, for catching that. So what we're going to do is, if it's all right, we will recall the vote on the approval of the agenda. I move the approval of the agenda. You're okay with seconding it? Thank you. I will now call the roll. Dr. Temez? Yes. Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Mrs. Lang?
Yes.
Mrs. Kruger?
Yes.
Mrs. Ergot?
Yes.
Mr. Swiger votes yes. And Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right, we have an approved agenda. We move next to our student representative reports, and here to welcome 2 of our representatives, we've got Noah Minty, and we have Anna Popp. And Anna, I believe, is joining us new, a junior from West, and Noah is a senior at West. We look forward to your update. Who would like to go first tonight? Well, Anna, come right on up to the podium, please. Welcome. We look forward to your update.
Hi, my name's Anna. I'm a junior at West, and I'm just here to tell you guys a little bit about life at the high school. So at the high school, we continued to prioritize creating a positive and supportive environment for all students. As part of our WBSD Way initiatives, we are focusing on reinforcing the values of respect, responsibility, and kindness throughout the school. We have just completed our first month of grade level assemblies, and our students and staff had a great time focusing on our goals and celebrating our accomplishments so far this year. The preliminary SAT, or the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, more commonly known as the PSAT, is an optional test that determines if students are on track for college success, with the potential to earn scholarships to pay for college. The test will be administered on October 29th for our juniors who are planning to participate in the National Merit Scholarship Program. Congratulations to East Senior Evelyn Wolf and West High School Senior Samantha Eckert on being named 2024 National Merit Scholarship Program semifinalists this year. Scholarship designees are selected based on the basis of their skills, accomplishments, and potential success in rigorous college studies. The College and Career Center at the high school is giving upperclassmen opportunities to explore options for life after high school. Juniors and seniors are encouraged to attend the upcoming Wisconsin Education Fair at Mount Mary College on October 14th. They're also given the option to take the ASAVB, a career planning resource that aligns students' strengths and interests with an after-high school plan. We shifted our practices for personal technology use to limit the amount of personal technology used during our learning time at the high school. While this adjustment took a little time to get used to, our students and staff have adapted to this practice pretty well so far. Students are very excited for homecoming this week. The theme this year is Happiest Place on Earth, so our dress-up days are Disney themed. Today was Monster University Monday, which is why I'm dressed in my UW-Madison gear. Tomorrow is Teen Beach Tuesday, so students will be dressing as bikers or surfers. Wednesday is Dress as Your Favorite Disney Character Day, and on Thursday, students will be dressing in class colors. On Friday, students will show their school spirit by dressing in East and West spirit wear. Following the school day on Friday will be other homecoming events, including the parade, which will begin at 4:15 p.m., followed by the East vs. West varsity football game at 7 p.m. The homecoming dance will be held on Saturday in the high school field house. Powder Puff and Powder Buff are also part of the homecoming activities. Powder Puff football took place on Sunday with 4 grade level matchups between East and West girls. Powder Buff volleyball will be taking place on Wednesday night with East and West grade level teams facing off in the field house. Senior Kylie Altendorf of the West High School volleyball team has reached the milestone of 1,000 digs in her high school career. The last time a West volleyball player reached this milestone was in 2019. The school record is 1,255. The West Bend's girls swim and dive co-op team finished third as a team in North Shore Conference relays, and they took first place in diving. The Washington County Trail Sharks mountain biking team did well at the Englewood meet in Fall River last week. The athletes did great. East got 16th and West got 18th out of 70 teams. The West Bend Girls Co-op took 6th in conference as a team, with Addison Landy earning a second team all-conference recognition and Sydney Clemens earning a third team recognition. Now I'll move over to Noah, who's doing.
Awesome. I'm Noah. As usual, I'll be here representing co-curriculars. Starting out, the annual Youth Impact Club 5K Butterfly Run and Walk has had a huge success, featuring the dance team, the high school choir, and even a dunk tank. The event apparently boasted the highest attendance on record. The high school has now welcomed 2 brand new co-curriculars, Comic Book Club and First Robotics. The Principal Advisory Committee just started up. The Student Principal Advisory Committee is a group of students who provide direct input and feedback to the principal on various school-related matters. This committee allows students to voice their celebrations and concerns, share ideas, and discuss issues that impact their school experience. Both of us are actually on this committee. It's a really great way for members of the student body to directly share our thoughts and feelings with Ms. Potter and other administrators. We are currently looking at expanding the membership of the committee to include more representatives from different grade groups. Next up, we will be hosting our annual National Honor Society induction ceremony in the auditorium on October 16th from 6:30 to 8 for West, and October 23 from 7 to 8:30 for East. So I'll take this time, we're doing something new this year, well, I'll just remind you guys of some upcoming events and reminders. On October 18th, there will be no school for students. On October 21st, it will be the Fall Choir Concert. October 24th will be parent-teacher conferences, followed by a fall orchestra concert. October 30th is an indoor marching band scholarship concert. And then November 1st will be the end of quarter 1. Thank you so much for listening to all the wonderful things happening in our school.
Great. Thank you to both of you for your presentations and for keeping us connected. We appreciate it and look forward to seeing you at future meetings. All right, next on our agenda is public participation. And so I have 3 participant comment cards. And so what I'm going to do is read the note. We've come to the public participation portion of our agenda. There's 4? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a 4th. All right, 4. We've come to the public participation portion of our agenda. Board Policy 187 prescribes the nature and procedures for this segment. I summarize the policy at this time, but copies are available at the back of the room, and I encourage you to familiarize yourself with the policy in its entirety. Residents of the district, parents and guardians of children in district schools, and employees of the district may participate. Participants desiring to address the board should obtain and complete a participant comment card near the entry and turn it over to the president prior to the meeting or when allowed by the president. Participants may comment concerning an agenda item or a non-agenda item. Each participant will be called to the podium and given 3 minutes to speak. The participant must state his or her name in relation to the district. This information will appear in the minutes of the meeting. The board will not engage in debate concerning the remarks or take immediate action. The board may refer the matter to the superintendent, a committee, or take the remarks into consideration in future action. Board Policy 872 provides a formal process for citizen complaints, and Board Policy 520 provides a process for employee complaints. The board recommends use of these procedures as they guarantee a fair and timely response. So I'll now invite participants forward to speak. We have a visible timer behind me to help manage your time, and also with the number of participants, I'll alert the speakers as to who is on deck. And lastly, to help ensure that all participants are heard and that this meeting runs efficiently, we ask that you please abstain from conversation, comment, or applause during or after public participation comments. I'll now invite participants forward. Our first participant tonight is Ms. Jody Geenan, and on deck is Ms. Mary Wigan. So we invite Ms. Geenan forward. And Ms. Geenan, on your participant comment card, you've indicated you are a resident of the district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. If you'd please state your name, and then the next 3 minutes will be yours.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Jody Geenan. I am a resident, taxpayer, and familiar face to this school district school board. Normally, I speak on bad curriculum and age-inappropriate books offered in our school district. While some strides have been made to improve transparency, other strides have walked the improvements backwards, such as going from listing some of the specific vulgarities on the permission forms for the books to simply listing them as some or limited. This feels very dishonest to me. Today, I am here once again because of the lack of transparency that this school district has with the public. This time it is about the $165 million referendum with interest included being passed off as $106 million. This mendacious tactic of pretending there isn't any interest on the loans for which the taxpayers will be responsible that the school district uses when presenting its referendums just keeps repeating itself every couple of years. Does a school district ever stop to think that if it were transparent, the public might trust it and feel better about adopting its recommendations? Furthermore, I'm wondering why the school district would ask taxpayers to foot the bill for $165 million when we have so much declining enrollment that we are closing 5 buildings of schools and offices. I understand that a portion of the referendum is general maintenance, but that signifies poor planning and budgeting. Shouldn't there also be income from selling or renting these buildings that are being closed? Why isn't that figured into the referendum finances? Are the taxpayers being played by the school board and administration? It sounds like this school district is not living up to the school board policy 615. This chalks up as another reason to add to the multiple other reasons to distrust anything the majority of this school board or administration presents to the public. I think the best thing the school board can do for our school district in order to try to rebuild the public's confidence is to revoke the referendum. And if they don't, I hope that the public votes no on the referendum. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We invite Ms. Mary Wigan forward, and then on deck is Ms. Sue Kellum. And Ms. Wigan, you indicated on your participant comment card that you're a resident of the district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. If you could please state your name for the record, and then the next 3 minutes will be yours.
Okay, Mary Wigand. I guess I would agree with Jody. When I found out about the communication that the district's been putting out about the referendum, and they're not following policy, I think that's very concerning. It's very confusing to people, and it doesn't give them a chance to really understand what they're voting for. So I think it's time to pull back on that and regroup before you bring it to the public. But I want to read a letter to the editor that I wrote recently. My husband, Dave, who's here, and I both grew up attending schools and graduating from the West Penn School District. Our 4 children attended schools here, and Dave proudly served a term on the school board. We hardly recognize the so-called education students received today in the West Penn School District. For example, while we are well aware of excellent literature choices for students, the West Penn School District chooses to allow and even encourage students to use materials that are full of profanity and, sadly, sexually explicit materials. Concerned parents and citizens tried to get objectionable material removed, and they even made suggestions for great classical literature, but they had minimal success. Students in the West Bend School District still learn from materials that have graphic descriptions of sex and violence. Profanity abounds in many of the district's choices of educational material. Gender confusion is alive and well in some materials. While test scores are down, woke ideology is up. Enrollment keeps going down, yet costs keep going up. Wholesome and uplifting educational choices that will help guide our children and encourage them to be happy and productive adults does not seem to be the preferred choice of the West Bend School District. So what do? Reward them with more of our money? The West Bend School District is currently asking for more money to run our local schools. A referendum will be on the November 5th ballot. They're asking for $165 million with interest included. Rewarding them with more money for doing such an inferior job only encourages them to continue to do the same. Homeowners and renters all suffer when taxes go up. Please vote no with us on this referendum question on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you. We invite forward Sue Kellum, and then on deck is Mr. Bart Williams. And Ms. Kellum, as you approach the podium, on your participant comment card, you indicated you're a resident of the district. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Great. If you'd state your name, and then the next 3 minutes are yours.
Thank you. My name is Sue Kellum. Thank you for giving me time to speak. I'm very nervous, I'm sorry. I don't like public speaking. I'm a resident and taxpayer in the West Bend School District, and I too am here today about the referendum. I support the referendum, the revocation of the referendum that has been deceitfully marketed, seemingly deceitfully marketed as $106 million instead of the $165 million that it will end up costing homeowners and renters in taxes. From what I can gather, this does violate School Board Policy 615, which was written in hopes of preventing such fraud. In addition, with the economy the way it's been, where everything costs more but almost no one is seeing an increase in their income, it doesn't seem fair to strap on another expense. This is especially true considering that we have seen a significant decrease in enrollment with no real increase in sight, which is justifying the closure of 5 buildings. Would you please consider, thank you for the consideration of my request.
Thank you. And we invite forward our final speaker tonight, Mr. Bart Williams. And Mr. Williams, as you approach the podium, you circled on your participant comment card that you are a resident of the district. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Excellent. If you'd state your name for the record, and then the next 3 minutes are yours.
Bart Williams. I salute Board Member John Donaldson for proposing revocation of this ill-founded, unadvised, irresponsible, unnecessary, overpriced, burdensome monstrosity of a $165 million referendum. This can be done. In October of 2008, the board canceled a similarly horrible, although smaller price referendum in October of 2008. So this is legal, it's happened here, it can be done. Also, horrible games are being played with Policy 615. I wrote this policy and passed it unanimously on January 23rd, 2012. Now, there's no history and there's no adoption of that. If you look at the current one, it says adopted March 7th, 2022. This is an untruthful effort by the current board majority to deceive the public and pretend like they're all about public transparency, and this policy only came out in 2022. Wrong. I passed it unanimously. Dave was on the board in January of 2012. This type of games and shit is not done with other policies. For instance, Board Policy 100, School Board Operations. It says right there, if you look right now, adopted August 28th, 1972, last revised August 26th, 2024, last reviewed August 9th, 2021. So why can 1972 stay on that policy, but yet not 2012, 30 or 40 years sooner, or newer, more recently, stay on my policy? Again, it's a dishonest effort by the board majority to pretend that they're all about transparency. And speaking of that, this is not transparent. You say here, whether it's a facilities referendum, I'm reading for 615, operating referendum, or any other type, the genuine transparency, not true. The actual cost, $165 million, is hidden in small type pages down below on the website. This is an absolute violation. I told Ms. Wimmer when I met with her at the hub that if you guys were going to play these snake oil salesmanship games with the policy, I was going to file a formal complaint. I'm going to keep my word, and tomorrow you will have a formal complaint for violating 615. This was done too in 2019 when the previous superintendent tried to lowball and lie to the public about the cost of a $74 million referendum, call it $47 million. We made him correct the last mailer, send a new mailer, hold a press conference, and guess what? The referendum went down in flames. When you inform the public about how terrible this is, things go down in flames. School report card scores have gone down 9% in just the last 5 years, and enrollment has gone down 951 students in the last 5 years. So why on earth would we spend more money on a failing, declining enrollment, declining quality, declining report card scores district? You wouldn't do that with your own money. Invest tons of money in a failing enterprise. Why would we do this with the public's money? Don't do it with mine. Tonight you have a chance to rescind this horrible referendum. Please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our public participation, as that was our final speaker. And we move then on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. Tonight on our consent agenda, we have minutes of the September 9th, 2024 regular board meeting, minutes of the budget hearing, 2024-25, as well as minutes of the 105th annual meeting of electors. We have one contract, no resignations, and no retirements. We also have early college credit program course requests and Start College Now course requests as part of the consent agenda, as well as disbursements posted to October 4th of 2024. I'll pause to see if there are any questions on items regarding the consent agenda. Hearing none, I'd move to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second? Kelly, we'll give that one to you. I think you got it in just the nick of time. We have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Any final discussion? I'll call the roll call vote. Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Dr. Temez? Yes. Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Ms. Aragot?
Yes.
And Mr. Swigert votes yes. Thank you. The consent agenda is approved. We move then to reports. And our first report is the Curriculum Committee report. And Melanie Aragot, our Curriculum Committee Chair, will give that report. Melanie.
All right, so the Curriculum Committee met on September 17th. At the meeting, Dr. Trueblood presented a letter to parents introducing book clubs to start the school year. This letter is to inform parents and guardians of what their students are reading and learning. And additionally, new this year, they're asking parents or guardians to choose their permission preferences using a digital permission slip in grades 7 through 12, and then paper and digital will be for 5th and 6th grade, as that was the feedback we had gotten from parents and teachers and guardians. And then Dr. Trueblood also shared findings of testing the updated definition for graphic violence in materials. And there was a book they did used as an example to highlight for discussion purposes, and we had found that the definition is clearer than it was before, and the consideration for limited use of graphic violence in the material's plot, characters, historical setting, or literary merit is valuable, and while the threshold descriptions limited and some are subjective, they are operable. And then based on these findings, we concluded that the review process was more effective and efficient for selection using the updated definition, and that the graphic violence content in the sample book did meet criteria for selection. This ends my report.
Thank you. Any questions regarding the Curriculum Committee report? Melanie, thank you for your report. We move to the Superintendent's report. Superintendent Wimmer.
This week actually marks the Wisconsin Association of School Boards Wisconsin School Board Week. So we'd like to recognize the 7 members of our board for their commitment, their time, their talent, their hard work to ensure the best service to our students, staff, and community. Your efforts are all appreciated, so thank you for serving. As the students noted, it is homecoming week, spirit days across many of our schools, and a lot of east-west matchups throughout the week that you heard about, including the parade and the culminating football game on Friday. One of the highlights of the varsity football game just preceding that event is the Athletic Hall of Fame induction. This year, there are 7 very deserving people joining the Hall of Fame, so I would encourage everyone to get to the game early to see that at 6:30 p.m. Our inductees this year include Andy Hedberg, West class of 2005, baseball, basketball, all-conference, all-state, all-county, student athlete, as well as valedictorian of his class. Bob Holquist, West distinguished contributor and coach. Bob has served in various ways, including teaching, coaching, and supervising the fitness center. Katie Yankee, East class of 1996, led her team to 2 state volleyball championships, also played volleyball at the University of Nebraska. Joe Salamone, East class of 2020 and state champion in the 100 high hurdles in 2019, as well as a holder of several school records. Katie Schneider-Pendowski, East Class of 1996, another member of that 93-95 state championship volleyball team, also a member of the UWM Athletic Hall of Fame. And Richard Smith, East coach. Richard was a coach for the East boys track and field for 38 years, led the team with 15 Wisconsin Little 10 conference championships. Tony Spaeth, East Class of 1988 and coach. Tony just retired from Badger Middle School as a teacher. As an East student, he was a 4-sport athlete who still holds several records for East football. He also coached the East football and track and field teams. So again, that game begins at 7, but the induction begins at 6:30. So I would invite our community to celebrate that honor. And as noted, we do have a referendum question currently on the fall ballot. Our final facilities open house is next Monday, October 14th at Jackson Elementary School. That is set up as an open house, so you're invited to attend anytime between 6 and 7:30 p.m. There's no formal presentation, but there are stations that dive into facilities, finances, configurations of the long-term plan, and tours of Jackson Elementary will be available. If you're unable to attend, we are working to have a community mailing that provides information on the referendum. It was also National Custodians Day. On October 2nd, we celebrated National Custodian Day, and we want to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to our hardworking custodians, their dedication and effort to ensure our schools are safe, clean, and welcoming every day. So again, thank you to those teams. And also a thank you to McLean staff. An energetic group met after work and volunteered at the annual United Against Hunger event in September to pack snack bags for area nonprofits and schools. So thank you to the McLean staff for representing West Bend at that event. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Superintendent Wimmer? All right, hearing none, we'll move to our discussion items. We start with our first item, district funding review. I believe Andy Sarno, our Assistant Superintendent of Business and Operations, is going to walk us through that item. Mr. Sarno, good evening.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you. Just call it a little bit of a catch-up, even as we just had our annual meeting and budget hearing a couple of weeks ago. So I'm kind of sneaking this meeting in. I found that it's just a nice opportunity to review a little bit of the information as we're 2 weeks out from setting the final levy, final mill rate, as well as the final budget. This year, we actually have 2 because of the referendum. So we will be setting one is if the referendum were to pass and one if it was not to pass. So squeezing this in, always keep in mind that a budget is a working document. The things that we've been planning for months, sometimes the spend plan changes. So this spring, even though we're setting that final budget at this point in time, which is a formal process, high potential of bringing forward an amended budget, and then as well wrapping that up, as always, just like we're in process now with the audited financials, typically finalizing those in December. A little bit of a reminder, we're now in our 32nd year of revenue limits. So when we calculate a revenue limit, when I say it's inside of the revenue limit, we take a 3-year average of our membership. Those are the students living in the district. We multiply that by the dollar amount that the state provides. So dating back to 1993, we can track what that revenue limit or what those dollars per student equals. We are allowed some recurring as well as some one-time exceptions to the revenue limit. Typically, our vouchers, some special ed opportunities, but we include those, and that really is what calculates the actual revenue limit. Pretty simple in a sense, because we're able to graphically show what that looks like. Another component of that then is we take a look at that revenue limit authority. Again, what's inside of the revenue limit, it's really made up of state aid, money that comes from our state as an equalized aid formula, fairly in-depth with how that's calculated, plus the property tax levy. But really, we know what the revenue limit is. The state provides how much state aid we receive, so it's really then what is left after that formula becomes that tax levy when we say we're levying to the maximum allowable authority within the revenue limits. Another formula that's important to remember then is when we take that full levy, and this is inclusive of what's inside the revenue limit and also what the board has authorization. So this year, just as an example then, anything in Fund 80, which is our Community Services Fund, if the referendum were to pass, that's allowable revenue limit authority outside of the calculation. But so we take a look at the total levy, divide that by the total property values, now over $8 billion. We multiply that by 1,000, and that gives us a mill rate. And it's important to know that a mill rate, again, it's how much you're being taxed per $1,000 of value on average across all parcels. But it can be just seen as the taxation rate. We use the term mill because that's what we're given by the Department of Public Instruction. But it's important to know that it's the taxation rate. Just a little bit here that we have over the next couple of weeks. We have our third Friday in September. We have our initial submission to the Department of Public Instruction. It is a little bit lower than earlier projections that we'd been using. Financially speaking, though, because of the declining enrollment exemptions, it's net neutral. It doesn't help the following years, but it's net neutral to the current year. We do have some exemptions, again, where I'd mentioned there's some components that we're finalizing, getting final pieces that will be built into the revenue limit over the next couple of weeks, as well as a big piece, remembering that formula, the state equalization aid. We received that this year on October 15th. So it's gonna be a pretty quick turnaround with finalizing that information from Tuesday. We have our final meeting then about 6 days later on the 21st. We do have our final property value from the Department of Revenue. It's not formalized, but we have it. We'll be updating that as well. Again, that's used to calculate the mill rate. And again, we'll have 2 budgets, 2 levies, 2 mill rates will be brought forward on Monday, October 21st. We wait until November 5th, technically until November 6th, or even after those votes are canvassed, to then submit our information to the Department of Public Instruction with what the results are of that referendum. So just a little bit of a lead into 2 weeks from now when we'll be bringing that final information forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions or if you have any comments.
I think we appreciate the preview and kind of the status report of where we are. Much appreciated. Board members, questions for Mr. Sarno on his presentation? All right, we appreciate it very much. Thank you. I believe perhaps you're participating in the next item. Next on our agenda is planning for potential non-approval of the November 2024 facilities referendum. And Superintendent Wimmer, are you going to kick this off for us?
Yep, someone's forgotten their glasses up here. Okay. All right, I'm like looking at everyone in the audience. It happens. So our entire cabinet team has been involved in talking about and planning for the potential if the referendum is not passed, because we certainly have needs. We have excess square footage, so we want to talk about and think about decisions and discussions that the board should be having, and some of our thoughts and ideas as well. So we'll be walking through that, again, making sure we have contingency plans in place because we know there's certainly needs associated with those buildings. Recall that our facilities plan does include the closure of Decorah, Fair Park, the current Jackson Elementary campus, with that one being the one rebuilt, the closure of the building we're standing in, the Education Service Center, which has both our district office operations and some alternative programs, as well as the Rolfs Education Center, which is directly behind us, for those unfamiliar. So again, we're talking about still minimizing that footprint and how would we proceed with that, because that is still the target of the long-term facilities plan. This is a recap of all the referenda work. Without those dollars, this work would not be completed. We would have to reanalyze the different capital pieces. So these were the different buckets of safety, security, different pieces with, again, adding some toileting rooms, ensuite bathrooms as we move programs, those pieces. So this is just a visual of the work.
So we're not going to be closing the underutilized schools?
Nope, I'm getting to that.
But you have it right here, and it's very deceptive.
Oh, yeah.
In closure of underutilized schools, this will not be completed without the
Yeah.
referendum funding.
We'll make
That's a big
sure and-
scare tactic to me.
Yeah,
that
no,
you guys
we'll,
are trying to
we'll
play,
clean
and I
that
don't
up.
like it.
Yeah, that's fine. I can clean that up and repost it after the discussion. That's not the intention. It's the work to the side.
It
So
looks like the intention. It's in bright red lettering.
that's fine. I accept that feedback, and we'll make sure we take care of that and note that it was cleaned up after based on that. So again, the key implications of non-passage, we wouldn't have some of that funding for some of those infrastructure pieces. We would need to then look at absorbing it through operational budgets and how we would do that, because we're operating those inefficient buildings. What would we look at for closures? And the closures would occur without the improvements noted. So again, it's the improvements, the intention that the capital's not there, but the improvements around those would not occur. So we wanted to go through and understand the pieces that the board would have to take. Again, it's no steps that you need to take, but it's things that you need to start thinking about and having discussions about. Reassessing the capital priorities. So we'd bring forward kind of those different lists of things based on our assessment, and we would look at implementing a phased school closure. We would recommend that we start with the 2 elementary schools and then follow with the district office and Rolfs. I think it would be hard to take on the scope of all those closures in kind of the 1-year targeted timeline. So we really started looking at how we would maybe lead with the 2 schools, reconfigure that enrollment, and then step into the other 2 closures. But that's something we'll kind of go through and work through a timeline and get board feedback so that we can develop that. And again, certainly we'd need to make operational adjustments in those budgets and create a closure plan with board input. So that gets at the closures and those pieces. We've been very clear with our faculty, with the families at those campuses, that regardless, we would be looking at closure. So I think the board engaged in developing what that timeline would look like would be helpful for those families and staff members as well as the administrative team as we walk you through dealing with budgets, what the capital improvement plan looks like, and the staffing and how that would shift. So a reminder, we would still be advocating for closure because it does avoid $51 million in future capital maintenance costs. So throughout this work, we've talked about advocacy for closure of campuses. So we would still be doing that. This is just a reminder of what that scope of work looked like over the next few years. And I also put in here a reminder, it's nothing that we need to delve into now, but if we're keeping the current Jackson Elementary online, which we do recommend because of the significant distance it is from us, some of the pieces that we would need to go through. We'd have to just reassess what we would take care of when. We certainly were going to limp along systems over the next 3 years as our original timeline looks to close in 3 years' time. But when you look at what are those most pressing needs of that, you're really looking at really going through that list again. Tim and I went through it one more time and just came up with in that next stretch of time approaching $10 million. But it doesn't include a lot of things. That's an exercise the full board should go through. What is that list? What are all those things? What are you going to put on? What are you going to take off? What are we going to remove as we look at making that campus viable for the future? So that would be an exercise we recommend. Any questions about how to assess what needs to be done at Jackson if that current campus stays online? Okay. So certainly we've talked about closure and that plan right now taking us over multiple years. We highlighted some things that we started thinking about. We recommend splitting that closure instead of a comprehensive closure plan. We could actually start early. You're not waiting on construction. You're not waiting on amenities to go into those other buildings. So we actually recommended leading with Decorah and Fair Park so we could close those and reorganize the district boundaries and footprint as a first step. Then that would leave our district office operations functioning in its current capacity while we navigate all that work. And then Rolfs, which is just our early learning programs, as those secondary closures. So you can see us kind of looking at accelerating that timeline for those schools to be closed by 1 year. So we could do that work and phase it in. Because again, if we're doing that, just making sure we have the capacity to still do that right on behalf of the students, the staff, families and community, and make sure we've got those capital improvement plans lined up, we think would be beneficial. That's a little bit of a departure from the kind of 3 years' time. This is us actually recommending to phase those. Is there any question or dialogue around that?
Questions? I mean, I think, and board members can agree, I mean, one question is, we don't legally have to close schools.
No, you don't.
But we've talked about, I think as a board, and others should speak up, that this does make sense, that if we don't need the capacity, the operation of it just doesn't make sense. So that being said, this doesn't seem an unreasonable plan.
Yeah, the only nuance is that we're recommending, again, that we split the closures and we lead earlier with the schools. So we want to make sure we have board support for that as we move forward into next stages of board discussions or planning. So we will proceed on that. I'm not seeing or hearing anyone
I have a question.
opposed.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you're going to start packing and moving to Corn Fair Park in 25, 26, would that be happening like towards the end of the year that they would then move to Silverbrook?
No,
Or
we'd
would
start
they would be
packing in
moving
spring.
multiple times?
Nope, so that's a good question. So it's at the end of that year, you'll pack up, coordinated move over the summer so that they open at their new school.
Into whichever
Yeah,
school they
and we
would.
would, these are just big idea timelines, so the actual would most likely be kind of a seasonal or month by month of the work, just so we can phase that in, because there'll be significant packing and moving.
Okay.
Where do the costs come from? 75,000 to 150,000? Or have we gotten estimates on this?
Yep, Andy actually met, if you want to speak to that, just got from the field, kind of most recent moves for that. So we did not bid that out. It is not for our square footage. There is no actual bid. That's why it's such a wide range of estimates. He connected with colleagues around that to understand what recent costs have been, so.
I had the chance, excuse me, had the chance to speak with about 5 or 6 colleagues that have been either currently in this process or have recently been through it. Additionally, I've had the chance to work with a company just to have a discussion. So highly dependent on how much stuff we have and where those staff members are going. This is just a range at this point in time for a similarly sized building between the 2 elementaries that we're discussing. So it's really dependent. It's something obviously at that cost we would be soliciting bids and trying to really dial in on actual expenditures, doing walkthroughs, other detailed information to make sure that we know actual expenses.
Okay, and have we done audits of the current schools that we're planning on starting to move, of what's just sitting in storage that doesn't need to be there right now? That would add to the cost that doesn't need to? We can potentially move it early by staff we already have?
That assessment would be a part of, that would be a step along the process.
Because, I mean, I've seen some of those rooms, and there's rooms full of old materials. Not saying they're out of date or not used, but they're not used all the time. And if we don't need them in that school, we should definitely think about moving them early and not adding them to the $75,000 to $150,000 cost here. Seems like we could. That seems extreme. That seems expensive, but especially when we have a full building full of people. Pack up your own room. I don't know why that's so hard.
There's a fair amount, when you pack up a school, there's a fair amount that an individual staff member would pack, some discretionary items, desk items, those things of that nature. When it comes to moving the furniture, the pieces of that, we go with other trained, skilled staff to release ourselves from the liability of people with injuries for those kinds of moves. And to your point, it's anytime you move, even if you change classrooms, it's kind of that time to go through your stuff and kind of, leave some things behind maybe that you haven't used in a while. So that would be examined too.
Yeah, and with that note, how much of those actual items, like you're speaking of, desks and things like that, are actually going to be moved to another school that's already furnished with those items?
Yeah, again, that's the piece of that audit that you talked about. What actually moves, what doesn't? That would be an assessment, and that would help you when you bid it out so that they know the actual workload associated with their bids.
Yeah.
So with that said, knowing that piece, then that's something that the administrative team could move on faster rather than slower, is looking at some of those contents, mapping it to new rooms, looking at the scope of what might need to be moved. I'm hearing the interest in kind of the real scope of that work as well as some actual bids.
I think contingency planning is always a good idea.
Okay?
I think there's any objections, board members? Not hearing any?
Thank you. So we talked about those expenses, and if you were looking at adding staff time, if you were looking at a day across the district to add staff time, there's rough estimates of different dollars. We can look at, again, who's impacted by that, what kind of level of packing or unpacking might they need to do. We'll include that in our next layer of planning. Andy Sarnow works with the transportation company to analyze busing. We believe that to be cost neutral. I get that question a fair amount from the public as well. Jen, with, especially Decorah, a neighborhood school where we have some walkers, are we adding cost? We have multiple tiers that are available in a busing system, so that's why we're looking at some cost neutral pieces, but he'll continue to work with those teams on that. And then nutrition, it may be more efficient because there's not multiple kitchens, but those are some separate dollars, and we'll still be responsible for the program at the number of kids we're serving, just like I said, maybe less kitchens to maintain or deal with equipment there. We also talked about the operational expenses of those buildings. Andy, again, did some work to pull all the different pieces of gas, electric, water, that's associated with those. I kind of coupled them together, again, looking at closing Decorah and Fair Park as a first step, ESC and Rolfs. He also did some connecting with Job-alikes, as has Tim. What can you count on savings? I can't completely abandon a building, and that's a next item for conversation. So you have to maintain some amount of heat, emergency lighting, safety and security checks, walkthroughs, those kinds of things. So even just taking a very conservative estimate of 50% at this time, we just wanted you to have that visual of what those properties cost for some of those pieces.
So is this at the 100% rate or the 50% rate
That's
that you
the
talked
estimated
about?
savings. So if you look at the two, Decorah and Fair Park, it's $114,000 in expenses based on the last year. So cut in half would be that perhaps estimated savings of, we'd want to at least hit that halfway point on those. Because again, those are dollars that we would avoid having to budget for and could push back in. Again, when we look at some of the costs associated with moving and how we could obtain some dollars, maybe those dollars could be used for those next moves, things of that nature. That's what we're talking about with reorganizing our allocations. So Andy.
Yeah, please. In this slide, I apologize, I'm a little bit froggy today. I'm good. Wanted to identify some different areas where we might have some financial strategies, some dollars that might be available. So I'm just going to walk through this quickly, but would certainly entertain discussion. General Fund, Fund 10, where that is overall provides the opportunity for our instruction as well as our operations. So we're already contributing a little over $1.8 million, again, within the revenue limit. So general fund is within the revenue limit for facilities dollars. Unless we were to carve out dollars within our general fund that's already tightly strapped, our revenue limit increases haven't kept up with inflation. But at this point in time, I would not recommend any dollars being set aside. That would be very difficult. We do have our capital expansion fund. That's where I'd mentioned, again, within inside the revenue limit. Those are dollars that we've purposefully set aside per board direction, increasing by 4% per year. So the current allocation, $1.875 million. We're prioritizing projects. We would need to reassess those dollars and how they're being spent. That'd be really important to make sure then that as we had some equipment failure at one of the buildings, reprioritizing that to stay open. Because we already have a capital maintenance plan that goes out multiple years where those dollars have already been somewhat set aside, at least projected out. We do have another secondary, which is called the Capital Improvement Trust Fund. We had the ability to set dollars aside over the last 10 or so years There's currently, at year end, there will be $4 million within our fund balance. It'd be important to be able to use those dollars, be responsible with those dollars, to use them in a strategic manner, maybe not just fixing something in a building that's potentially going to be abandoned or moved out of, but $4 million that would be available immediately. We have the Barton sale dollars. They're being held in a designated or a reserved fund, $600,000 that can be used on any facilities projects. Additionally, we have the Jackson Trust. It was intended when it was originally set up to be used on a new construction. It could be used for maintenance, repairs, at the board's discretion. The last piece is our general fund. I'm very cautious about this, but I brought us from our current, where our audit this year will be approximately 17.2% fund balance. We'd have a board policy, 662.3, that gives us a range of unassigned fund balance of 14 to 18%. It grew percentage-wise because our budget is shrinking, but that $2.575 million would bring us down to the base 14%. It's not recommended, but again, it would still be within the board policy parameters, and it could be utilized within the scope that we're discussing at this point in time. Any questions on that at all? Yeah.
No.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And then lastly, really looking at program exploration. So looking at our various academic models for academics, student services, co-curriculars, working with our staff around kind of developing ideas around what could be impacted with that in mind to reduce finances so that those dollars could be allocated to offset some of those pieces and associated staffing proposals. So we would start to look at some of those pieces. Again, not wanting to negatively impact the learning experience of students, but are there other things that could be offered at different times? That tightening up, if you will, of our programs that would create dollars that could be then in turn reallocated. Any questions on that piece?
No.
And that really just leaves to the board the key pieces for us. We're coming around that our recommendation to split those closures and kind of start a little bit early and do that. But then these are the elements that we see for future conversations and direction from the board. If there's any other elements that you think of, you don't have to think of everything tonight, but reach out. So then we can put those in kind of upcoming conversations for discussion and potential action. Any questions or comments?
So this is a discussion item, so we appreciate it. And you talked earlier about the recommendation around split closures and doing that early. I think we had given feedback around planning that to proceed. All right. So you have what you need from the board so
Do
far?
it this time, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have potential future use for the proposed closed properties, which would include Decorah Elementary, Education Service Center, Fair Park Elementary, Jackson Elementary, and the Rolfs Education Center.
Absolutely.
Superintendent Wimmer.
Yeah, I'll walk you through considerations that you need to take as a board when you look at closing properties. That's certainly something that, again, comes up in community conversation. What's going to happen in my neighborhood? What's going to happen to that property? Or people expressing interest in properties. But again, part of that long-term facilities plan that we just reviewed was for those closures. And really, you can look at repurposing your buildings, their market potential, and we want to have some decisions and direction from the board around how to engage our community with that and how we could financially benefit. So again, just reminding you of our service area where our schools are. They're very centrally located. Those pieces of our buildings, their age, the ones that we're looking to take offline. You can see especially, again, Decorah, where there's parts and pieces added to, same with Fair Park and some of the other buildings. Less so this building, but with the others. Again, just reminding if people didn't tune into the prior one, what the long-term facilities plan is, which includes closures of those. Again, regardless of a referendum passing or failing, our contingency plan would include closures. So being really clear about that. A reminder to the community which closures those are, which buildings. Again, some of the scoring components from the comprehensive assessment that led us to that recommendation and ultimate decision by the board on which buildings to close. Again, that closure helps us avoid $51 million in capital improvements, nor is that footprint needed for the size of our district in the future. So again, still closing. So that leads to reuse. By adaptive reuse, you can look at repurposing. So Barton was bought and turned into some apartments. You could look at different buildings to use if we wanted to look at moving other operations out into some different spaces. So that's what it's looking at some senior things, looking at, if a recreation program wanted to take over a building and make it something different than a school. So then you have to look at the feasibility of those pieces and kind of what has to be analyzed. So I'll walk us through some of those components. So you have to explore any obligations or restrictions. It's interesting to note that the only historical designation we have in all of our schools is this building. Because of its connection to the Amity property next door. But looking at any other legal requirements, when we talk about Fair Park, there's some language around working with the county because of our proximity to county lands. Might they have interest in that, and making sure we ask them as a good neighbor if they've got some interest first. And looking at zoning, they're currently zoned as schools. What's the viability of rezoning, and what's that process for? That would help people determine their interest in those properties. And then you also have to look at the market conditions. So looking at having a professional appraisal. I did reach out to the company that did the appraisal for West Bend, as well as the most recent UW-WC campus. They did that one as well for the county and city. That comes in as from that one company, again, just understanding the background of that appraisal, about $5,000 per building that we would want assessed. I can reach out and get multiple bids and work. I also included a sample of that assessment. I think sometimes people think, or that appraisal, I should say, that that's just having kind of a realtor appraisal and what's that value, but it's actually a pretty comprehensive report that talks through the campus. And you can see those bullet points there, everything that's included. And again, there's a sample included in board docs, a most recent sample from that company that lets you see what an appraisal actually looks like. And again, we need to look at it over time. We're projecting a couple of years from now, whether it's 3 years from now or that kind of 2 or 4 year window. So understanding the appreciation and its appreciation or depreciation over time, as well as perhaps the local development. So I'd like to pause here and just have the board talk around having a professional appraisal done. Is that something that's of interest to the board at this time on those properties? Is that something you want to explore further with other companies and what their sample products look like? How would you like us to proceed with that?
Thoughts? My initial thought is the idea of an appraisal makes a lot of sense, because the question is if we were going to sell it and how much we should charge for it and what's fair, I think is valid and necessary. I'm interested in the board's thoughts. In the first $5,000 per, that sounds like a lot, but these are large properties as well, and we want to be sure that we've got a qualified appraiser. I mean, I think it makes sense to do a little bit of comparison shopping. Certainly, those are my thoughts. Other members of the board?
Yeah,
Kelly?
I would agree. I think that it's our due diligence to at least get them valued at something and know what is behind them. And obviously, they're in very different locations, so it'd be interesting to see what comes of that. So I would also be in favor of that.
And different, to our traditional schools, one's an office setting, one was a converted office setting. As you said, when people are looking at property and its potential reuse, future use, that kind of thing. So then what I'm hearing is to look at and scout some different companies that are qualified appraisers, so that I can bring that back for consideration and potential selection through the board.
One other thing I just will note is I've recently gone through the WWC property, and it's in decent shape. The appraisal came back at $5 million. Was surprised a bit, but I suppose the idea is it's fit for a school, and so if someone's going to use it, they would have to modify it unless they're going to use it as a school. And we talked a little bit earlier about the idea that, well, if we were to incorporate, this is how much we expect to get for these properties in our future budgets, we need to know how much we expect to get. And I think the appraisal is an important key role for that. Otherwise, in the meantime, it's speculation. But it's interesting that we likely should not expect to get $50 million per building.
Perhaps not, I wish, but again, making sure that we have some realistic expectations as well, so that we know and can expect how much money would be coming forward from any sale or lease of property, and how we could reallocate those dollars into the future projects, I think would be helpful. So that's how we'll proceed then, is exploring other qualified appraisals and bring that back for board discussion and decision. Especially timeline. Is there any timeline that the board has in mind when they expect that? Certainly when you work with an appraisal company, you have to get kind of in their work order, line up. Is there any expected timeline from the board? Because that would help maybe include or exclude certified appraisers that they maybe couldn't manage that timeline that the board expects, but is there any expectation of timeline?
The idea of selling a particular property, not that we necessarily have to first vacate it, but there is a chunk of time there. So I don't know that we necessarily need to artificially rush this. I think the more that we rush it, generally speaking, that causes prices to go up. If we say we need an appraisal, we need it now. At the same time, I don't think we want to wait 3 or 4 years. I know I'm being a little bit silly with that example, but I don't know that there's I think perhaps when we seek these bids, we can come back with what would their estimated, that, right, at this price, we could do it in this amount of time, and we can evaluate that together.
Yeah, perfect. Then that's the approach that I'll take. I won't box anyone, and I'd ask what their potential completion could be. And then that's just a factor that we could review in addition to kind of the scope and their costs. Thank you. Then we need to talk about community engagement and the board, what you would like to see for community engagement. Again, you're navigating schools, specifically I think of Decorah, where it's nested in a subdivision. That's where I talk with residents, it's kind of sitting right across the street from their home. How would we want to go around community engagement with the future of those properties? Would you want to include some listening sessions into that, targeting those neighborhood groups? How would we want to do that?
Yeah, I really like that idea. I like the future next week's session going into Jackson and getting the community into that school. I think that's important. So I think bringing it to that neighborhood, especially those people that are right there and that's important to them. They moved in there clearly after the school was there. I think involving them is a great idea.
I agree. I mean, I think it's another source for input, and it's always good to have additional options. I think it's also just being neighborly.
Yeah. Does anyone disagree with us creating some efforts on how we could engage the community regarding future use of facilities? Okay, then we'll put together some recommendations for the board to start those discussions. Again, because we have that timeline, even if we needed to execute earlier, we got a little ways in front of us, so I don't think there's anything burning to do in the next couple months, other than to surface the conversation at the board level and create a plan. And then we talked about financial implications for that. Again, we're reiterating, taking them offline because we don't need the space. We can serve our future footprint, and it helps us avoid some projected maintenance. We would want to more closely calculate The basic maintenance, again, we've just got some projections. We're unsure what we would need to put into those buildings if we had them and kept them vacant. We also need to look at kind of those next cost things that could break. I think of the boilers at Fair Park and where am I at with those? And if it was not in use by the school, or if we were leasing that, what's our obligation to still maintain that, or kind of that sale? So we'd want to kind of look at that context around those costs as well as the needs. So, what is that analysis? Could it be, and again, I think the appraisal will help you with that. Is this a property viable for some long-term income where you're garnering rent, or is it more kind of quick sale or sell this in the next so many years? I think your appraisal efforts will help you to create that structured timeline. But those were some initial thoughts of things that you just need to think about. And I've certainly seen school districts that board it up and really walk away for a little while. And I think that's really of concern for those in the neighborhood of Decorah. And I said the board has yet to have those conversations with that. But I did not think that was any intention, was to keep something boarded and not in use. It was either renting or selling to that point. There is no interest in mothballing a building and keeping it, correct? Okay. We may look at, and the appraisal may come back on that, especially Decorah. I led with the geography. Maybe the property's valuable. Maybe the building isn't. Maybe it's a building that we remove and we keep the property. I don't know. I don't have that appraisal either yet to see. I think those are the discussions and decisions that are in front of the board. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon.
Does that mean you'll get an appraisal or a cost for removal?
We could.
For some of those numbers
Yeah,
to be-
possibly you might want to look at that initial appraisal, and then you could do a direction from there, and then get some other, bids on specific removal, kind of directing what comes back from that appraisal.
Because you're probably talking hundreds of thousands to remove that building.
Could be.
So,
Could be, yeah, and you might want to just buy property. You might want, your appraisal might help you to know, like, that's not something we want to do. I think that's a first step, and it might lead to, as John's saying, some more discussion or decisions a little bit down the road. So again, we need to explore kind of all those possibilities, leasing for revenue, sales, just making sure that we still maintain, again, our recommendation for closure. That's in alignment with our long-term facilities plan. And then if you had to look at reopening or reuse of property, if the population trend should reverse, again, that would be well over a decade for birth rates to shift and make an impact. But it's just something you want to show that you're weighing as a board, that you're making really long-term future decisions as well. And again, how any decision you make weighs on your capital improvements and that financial obligation. Because again, if you're looking at leasing a building, who's going to maintain that? Who's responsible if it breaks? Is that something you push off to the tenant with, their full knowledge, or something you avoid? Not decisions you need to make tonight, but just forecasting. These are the discussions and decisions that need to come. Any additional things that come to mind now that we need to work into our planning or future discussions?
I think we're planting the seeds to explore some items that really are going to fuel future discussion.
Yep,
I
absolutely.
feel good about this direction. Not seeing other comments or questions from board members, so.
And certainly if they come up in the interim, just reach out to either Chris or myself, and we can include those. As you can see by the amount of work and kind of next steps, you'll certainly be in discussion for a while on the topic.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we move to the discussion item, proposed size of Jackson Elementary School. And Mr. Donaldson, I believe this was an item that you had requested added to the agenda, so I'll give you the floor.
yeah, just doing a little research, and I'm going to need a couple numbers here. I don't have them. I know they were similar, but reviewing the last the last facilities report done by the group of community members, the proposed Jackson's at that size or at that time was exactly or similar to the size that we're talking now for for the same school. Obviously, we're moving into a K through 5, so we're adding, or is it, yeah, so we're adding a grade. But I'm still having a hard time at the size of the school, 40 or 82,000 square feet for 429 students potentially. The national average per square foot, or cost per square foot is $239 to $295 when we're estimating ours be at $582 a square foot is what we're estimating. I'm just having a hard time understanding why the school needs to be this big when we're seeing reports saying, you know, that talk about, here's a report that we have from the ITBS, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, talks about limiting it about 100 square foot as a student and doesn't really talk about benefiting other than going under that. So, you know, to talk about the square footage being 191 square foot per student just seems a bit excessive for what we're doing, and the ask for the community to spend $48 million on the Jackson School when we continue to see declining enrollment, and what's those numbers gonna be? I mean, like I said, the last facility report that we got from the community members that did that for free and the estimated size that they were talking about for Jackson was 82,000 square foot, or almost exactly what we're talking about now, you know, 6 years later. So I'm trying to figure out, is this really what we need in the community? Is this really the cost that we really should be looking for? Or do we need to look at somebody else that might have something closer to the national average of that $239 to $295 per square foot? Because $582 a square foot seems like we're asking for marble on a vinyl budget here.
So, Superintendent Wimmer, maybe you can help me recall, as we go through this process, we haven't looked at blueprints really or anything of the sort. And I think at a working session we had talked about this a little bit around. It is interesting how this process works around. There's a dollar ask before we actually have blueprints. But go ahead.
Just correct, we have not done a formal design. You have the concepts, you have the grade level configuration. We spoke about amenities that we would want built into the plan, which include the reworking of a secure entry, which takes up a little bit more square footage, the addition of a full grade level, a separate gym and separate cafeteria, kind of those pieces, but it has yet to be designed.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my concerns is that we're asking for $48 million, or almost twice what the national average is per square footage. And is it just a ploy to get more money, knowing we're going to have a cheaper building cost, and then dump a bunch more money into the other buildings that we have? When we're proposing, this is going to be an awesome Jackson and $48 million for here, but we end up spending 30 and dumping the extra 18 where the community has agreed to pay for that Jackson, and now we're going to be using it somewhere else that wasn't outside of the communities.
John, you were at all the planning meetings. Did
I
you
know I
pick
was
up
at
that
all the planning.
Did you pick up that it was a ploy? Is that, I mean, you were there. Every meeting was public.
Yeah.
Where was the ploy?
Well,
And why didn't you call out the ploy at the meetings?
The ploy comes into when we started getting mailers out and information, and we have inconsistencies in the numbers, and where it starts to really look like.
With all the planning meetings that we had that you attended, where's the ploy? Where's why the constant need to seek the bad will? Where did
Because
the ploy come from?
that's what our position is here, to represent the community.
Yes.
You're representing the district right now. You
Absolutely.
don't care about the community, apparently. Because I'm asking the questions that
I
you're
don't
not
care
willing to
about the
ask.
community?
Well, you're
I
not
don't
asking
care
the
about
questions, are you?
What question would you like me to be asking? Show me where I don't care about the community.
I'm asking questions. Why does it matter what kind of questions I ask?
I'm asking where you think, you were at the planning meetings, why do you think there's a ploy?
Because
That's
because
an
of the
accusation that there's
inconsistencies
ploys.
and the numbers that they're putting up for all the numbers. I mean, we have so many inconsistencies in the mailers that we're putting out and the information that we're giving. People are not getting the right information. Now it starts to all come together and looks like, are we doing this for this? I sure hope not, but I have to ask a question.
So from a process perspective, Superintendent Wimmer, let's kind of walk through this. Let's say, for instance, that an estimate was off, hypothetically. I don't think it was, but let's just go through that process. What will ultimately happen is those detailed plans are going to come in front of this board as it relates to what is spent or what is not spent. And so there will be detailed transparency around how big the school is going to be, what it's going to include, the costs. We haven't even awarded bids necessarily yet. So there have to be additional steps that we take place as a board for additional review. This isn't that if the referendum goes through, we automatically are going to build a school equal to a dollar amount. I mean, maybe we can walk through what next steps are, because there are additional safeguards and reviews along the way.
You might recall two pieces. First, there was a triangular process piece that led you through all your steps of community engagement to get to your phase one. And then the next one was a series of circles to show where we are and where we aren't. The teams anticipate probably a full year of conversation and design around those final pieces before, to your point, putting together bid packages. I'm hopeful, as John said, where, you know what, great, the environment changed, we get some great pricing, we have done really good work around its design, those pieces. The board also, I can't just go out and add things to a project, not any of you could do that either. And a design team can't create a design, that's why my one I heard the other day was, is there a pool in there? I'm like, goodness, no. And there's checks and balances by the board on that. And then there's also the financial pieces. A board, when you save that money, you could choose to put that back into payments towards that loan and start, again, mitigating the interest pieces. You could look at all different financial strategies if you were to incur some savings with that. Again, those are board discussions and board decisions.
Yeah, and the hardest part I have is we have no plans yet. We're still asking for $165 million of our community to go in debt for. Zero plans. So how do I know that this is all legitimate? I mean, when I look at averages, like I said, $239 to $295 a square foot, that's the national average for the cost of an elementary school. A little bit higher for higher level classes, high schools and middle schools, because there's more technology and more stuff in them. But for an elementary school, that's our national average. And literally one of the lower number is the one I found, but I found another report that says 295, so I added it in there for you guys, so you can give the benefit of the doubt. But 582 is what we're asking to spend on this thing.
Another piece, we're talking about just the construction and the build. There's site preparation, there's different pieces that impact some of the overall costs. So I think even maybe breaking out those anticipated costs, there's a fire station sitting there, there's all our pieces that need to be prepared with that property. So those would make different packages for different schools as well.
So what I'm hearing, John, is you're looking at this saying, I'm not sure, this looks like this is a lot per square foot. My response would be, like I talked about a bit before, we have many additional decisions to make, and I acknowledge there are so many things really in school finance that's a bit backwards, and perhaps this is one of them, but the idea is we don't start with detailed blueprints, come up with an estimate, and then do the ask. It is a bit in the reverse, but this apparently is normal, and we had the benefit of many listening sessions with our advisors as we went through. So I would say the board has additional opportunity to take a look at those when we get to the blueprinting stage, assuming the referendum goes through, and you will have, and other board members will have, abundant chance to take a look at that and say, I don't agree with the size, or I don't agree with the construction methodology, or whatever it may be. So I acknowledge your concerns. I think they're a bit premature, and perhaps it's a victim of the process of how referenda work.
I just don't agree with that. I appreciate your input, but I mean, I think we can be a little bit more transparent to the community with the number that we're asking for. I mean, $165 million, $165.45 million, and just to go in blindly with no real plans and just to kind of wing it seems kind of irresponsible to me.
I'm not sure I'd characterize it as winging it or planless, but I acknowledge your concerns. Any other discussion on this item?
Chris, I can just add something quick.
Yes, Mr. Jenkins.
Just as a real-world example, in the village that I work for, we planned an update and expansion of our industrial park. And we had 2 engineering companies, project managers, other contractors, all give us various estimates. And, we borrowed $3.6 million for that expansion. But then fast forward when we got all the estimates in, thankfully, it ended up coming under budget by about 600,000. And so to John's point, that definitely can happen where our estimates and initial planning end up being richer than what the actuals are, which by then the school district would be in a great position. But I would hate to be on the opposite end where these estimates come in, or I'm sorry, these bids come in and it's higher than what our estimates are. So I have faith in the content experts that we have tapped into thus far to give us these best estimates. And I look forward to, future discussions as the actual bids and projects move forward.
Thank you. All right, we'll move forward then with our next agenda item. And that's referendum communication and policy 615. And Mr. Donaldson, I believe you requested this also be added to the agenda. And in case there are legal questions that came up, Superintendent Wimmer, I believe that we've invited legal counsel to attend. I see we have another attendee on the virtual session from Beulah Vetter. So Attorney Waterman, are you online?
I am. Good evening.
Great, and you can hear and see us?
I can. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, well, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Donaldson since this was his agenda item.
I think this is just a review for the next item on the agenda, but I'll just read this section. Obviously, it goes over the fiscal management and financial disclosure pieces of communications, and it states at the bottom, if the referendum solution is adopted by a school board, dedicated referendum information will be placed on the district website. Any additional public communication, mailed material to the district residents, postings on the district website, communications for media representation, presentations at the school board meetings and other meetings will be within the community regarding referendum cost must disclose items 1 through 4. And it discusses all the pieces. Obviously, we are completely in violation with our pieces that we are displaying on our informational sheets. It says 165.25 million. In small writing, it does say 165.45 million for the total, but what really gets me is the inconsistencies in the lack of transparencies in the little table here that says 106,250,000. And then it goes on to display a list or grid of property value, $100,000, and then your per year increase, which isn't really clearly listed here or identified, and it says $850 a month, and then $350 says $357 per year, or $29.75 a month. That doesn't that number, $29.75, is the $165.45 million. That is not accurate in the 106,250. We are completely misleading. So 106,250, but we're given a different number for a different number. We're giving a number for a different calculation. It's misleading and not transparent to me at all. I think we're completely in violation. We're not following our own procedures, our own policies here. I mean, this says anything going out, basically, any additional public communication. It doesn't stop and say, it just has examples. Any communication, including, I would consider the actual referendum verbiage that's going out to the ballot as public communication. And it has nothing on there about it. That's why, if we want to, I want to get to the action piece, because this is leading right up to my point.
Okay, shall we conclude? Are you okay concluding this?
I am.
This piece? All right.
I'd like to get the attorney's opinion on it, because John says we're in absolute violation, so I would like to hear that from the lawyer.
I can't speak to the accuracy of the numbers, but on the face, and I've reviewed the flyer, Superintendent Wimmer provided me with a copy. On its face, I don't see a violation. But again, I can't speak to the accuracy of the numbers.
I'd also like to point out that on the policy, it does say adopted January 23rd, 2012.
Mr. Donaldson, are you okay with us moving then to the next agenda item?
Yeah, I just have a question. So the numbers do not represent what they are being intended to. which is completely lack of transparency and does not follow that. I mean, the grid that says $29.75 represents 165.45 million, but on top of that chart, it says 106 million. That's an inaccurate representation of what we're trying to do here and completely a false statement. I mean, it says it underneath there, but I mean, everything is so misleading. No one can get an accurate description or an accurate representation of what we're actually asking for, which I believe violates policy 615. I mean, not to mention the information that's actually going to be on the referendum. We don't have the $165.45 million in there represented as a full value, which 615 does say public communication. That's public communication to me. How is that not?
Is that a question for me, John?
Yes, sir.
So there's a few things. I mean, one, again, I can't speak to the numbers that are in the flyer. I can say that, you know, obviously people can debate over what should be emphasized versus what shouldn't be, or how it should be presented. I do believe that all the, you know, it checks the box, so to speak, for all the items in the policy that are required to be on the flyer. So in that respect, I do believe it complies. With regard to the resolution itself, I don't believe that 615 requires that those additional numbers be completed or be included, I should say, in the resolution itself. I believe it stands for anything after that.
So you wouldn't
required to be included.
you wouldn't identify that as public communication?
I consider the public communication reference to mean anything that comes after the resolution.
But that's up for your interpretation, though, correct?
Let me finish what I'm saying, please. What I'm suggesting is when we do policy or legal interpretation, we pay close attention to words, and just as important are the words are the words that are omitted as well. You can see from the second paragraph there, it talks about any proposed referendum presented to the school board. It doesn't use the term resolution until the last portion, in the last paragraph. And I think that's key here, to suggest that when presented to the school board, not only does it not need to be provided, those additional items 1 through 4 provided in the referendum resolution, as long as it's provided to the school board, which I assume it has been, prior to them voting on it. Then, if you go down to the last paragraph, I interpret that, because there is the use of the term resolution, that the resolution adopted, anything that takes place after that, any additional public communications. So additional public communications is additional to the resolution, which means that the resolution is not one of those public communications. And so that's my interpretation of that policy.
Where are you reading this? What part is it?
I think this is the last paragraph of 615 that begins, if the referendum resolution is adopted. So I think, Attorney Water, what you're saying is if the resolution is adopted by the school board, then information will go on the website. Any additional communication will have the information, but that refers to something other than the resolution itself, because the resolution already happened in the past, so to speak. Is that, do I have that close?
That's a good summary.
That's not the interpretation I get, and you're allowed your interpretation as a lawyer and your position, but I think that's a cheap way of getting out of it. I think you guys are trying to do, but I'm still going to make the motion for the next piece, and I think we've completely misled the community with this piece, and I think it's you can't argue it either. I mean, when we're representing numbers in two different directions here, and we are completely misleading it, especially with that graph, that 106 million on the top, but represents 165 million on the bottom. It's inaccurate. I mean, we're not showing consistencies across these flyers, not one bit. And I've heard from multiple people, they have no idea about they're not understanding it's 165 million, and they're not approving of it. I mean, because they were thinking it was 106, and now we're looking at 165, and people are just hearing about this. We've sent so many mixed messages over this because we're emphasizing the 106 million when it's really 165.45 million. And we do not emphasize it enough that it's the full value. And that's the debt you're going into, 165, not 106.
John, what'd you buy your house for? You don't have to give me a real number, but you know, when you buy your house, do you know the total number that you're paying for your house?
Sure
in
do.
30
It's
years?
in the paperwork.
It's in the
Legally-
paperwork. It's in the
Legally
pa- it's in the
obligated to be in
paperwork.
there, and that's what you're looking
Absolutely
at.
it is. You're right. It's in the paperwork.
Yep, just like
But
any car.
almost nobody discusses that number when they talk about what they're buying their house for, selling their house for.
So
Or when they go to the
negligence is
bank and
just a
ask
reason to do
borrow,
this to people?
They go to the bank and they ask to borrow the amount of money that's the principal, knowing that then they get the interest calculation after they decide what the principal is.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an irregular practice. It's not like this is something shady that's been done. That is the normal process
And they
for
have
borrowing
to,
money.
and they have to display, legally, you have to be displayed
course, yeah.
what you're
Truth in
gonna be
lending, I
paying.
understand that.
Just like we should be doing for the community.
We are. Is it not displayed there?
Not
It's
very clear,
It's not in there?
not very clear.
Clear or not in there? Because some people might be able to interpret that more easily.
Yeah, they sure could, right?
Mr. Donaldson, are we at a point in the discussion
Yes,
where we
we
can
are.
move to the next action item then?
Yes, we are, sir.
All right, fantastic. Then what we'll do is we'll close that item and we'll move to our action item. So our first action item is revocation of the school board's August 12, 2024 resolutions related to authorization for a referendum election. And Mr. Donaldson, you had requested this item
Yep.
be placed on the agenda, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Yep, just due to the inaccurate listings and information that we've been displaying to the community, I think there's too much confusion over it and not enough transparency into what we're actually asking for. I would like to make a motion to approve the referendum question on the ballot be presented. What's the question here? Sorry, this is not listed like it usually is. Revocation of the school board's August 12, 2024 resolution related to authorization for the referendum election. Is that right?
Yeah, you would just repeat, is that what you're?
You want revocation of the school board's August 12th, 2024 resolution related to authorization for a referendum election. You are making that motion, correct?
Make a motion to, revocation of the school board's August 12th, 2024 resolution related to authorization for referendum election.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, is there a second to that motion? We have a motion and second for revocation of the school board's August 12, 2024 resolutions related to authorization for a referendum election. So we'll pause for discussion. I'd like to ask our council, with regard to this, can you talk about if this is a practice that is done? What are the legal implications? I'm guessing you might have thought of this.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's an interesting issue, and to be honest, in all my years with referendums, I've never seen it done. I will say that unfortunately, we don't have legal guidance on point. There's silence with regard to the statutes that govern referendums. I do think there's a strong argument that it's not permissible. Again, there's some uncertainty, but I think that argument stems from the idea that once the governing body has issued the resolution to be put on the ballot, that the question then becomes owned, so to speak, by the electorate. And by revoking it, it would suggest that somehow the school board has the ability to take back that decision from the electorate. The analogy that I think is apt is, similar to parliamentary procedure with a school board. Once a motion is made, that motion becomes owned by the body. It can't just be revoked unilaterally by the person who made the motion. And so I think you have a similar situation here. Again, there's uncertainty, but I think there's a strong argument to suggest that it can't be done. I know in the past, I believe in the district there was a postponement years ago. I wasn't involved with that, but I do believe that there's been some action in that regard, which, again, I don't know how that played out, but could be considered similar to this, but not exact.
In your practice with other referendums that you've seen, I mean, it is an interesting question regarding the amount of principal, the amount of interest. I can't say that I've read hundreds and hundreds of these, so I'm speculating here, and I'm hoping you can cure that speculation. That normally it refers to the principal for a number of reasons. One is the interest could fluctuate. It depends on what the interest rate is at the time of the borrowing. So it's hard to quote a specific number and hold true. The second is, as has been board practice really for a long time, the debt could be paid down early. That reduces the interest cost. But the one thing that is fixed is the borrowing. I mean, so that is a number that's much more certain. Is that generally why we don't see this? Can you fill me in on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I do believe that's the reason, right? Otherwise, I think it would have been made a requirement by the statute, and it wasn't. And you know, the same firm that drafted your documents and your questions is the same firm that does it for most of the districts in Wisconsin who we work closely with. And I can tell you that I don't know that I've ever seen in almost my 20 years since I began practicing school law. I don't think I've ever seen that amount of detail in the actual question itself. Now, I do agree that for transparency's sake, that is the kind of information that should be provided, but I don't see it in the question itself as presented in the resolution.
In 2008, there was a resolution that was removed, so it has happened.
I think in there, and I can go back and verify, they had discussed potentially having a fall referendum, but no resolution was adopted and revoked. I think that they removed that and moved it to spring. I can get those records and make sure that that's clarified for the board.
I don't believe that's accurate.
I'll get that information and make sure we share it with the board.
But you're making a statement as it's true, as it's factual.
I will get you
Trying
that
to
information.
trying to sway the vote.
That's not my intention.
All right, so we'll emphasize with the board that that's speculation at this point and interesting fact for the future. So we have a motion and a second in front of us. We've had some discussion. Is there additional discussion? June?
Yeah, so looking at the mailer, I think a reasonable adult would be able to understand that what we're asking for in the amount of 106 plus million is the principal, and then the interest will be that additional piece. So I don't think it's unrealistic to make that leap, and so I'll be voting no on this.
Other discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So a no vote on this would mean keeping it as is, correct?
Correct.
And a yes vote would be wanting to remove it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any other discussion? Mr. Jenkins, I'm just doing a sound check that you're still listening and able to respond before I call the roll.
I'm still here.
Very good. All right, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. I'm just going to read it back to be sure I have this right for the record. And I clearly misplaced my page. There we are. Motion and a second to revoke the school board's August 12, 2024 resolutions related to authorization for a referendum election. Hearing no additional discussion, I will call the roll. Turn to one of my roll call sheets. As soon as I can find one, pardon me. Well, I clearly misplaced it. Here we go. All right, I will now call the roll. Mr. Donaldson?
Yes.
Ms. Kruger? No. Dr. Temez? No. Ms. Lang?
No.
Mr. Jenkins?
No.
Ms. Aragot? No. And Mr. Swigert votes no. So that motion does not carry. And so that concludes that particular action item. Appreciate the discussion. And we move on to the next agenda item. Next on our agenda, I should say, thank you, Attorney Waterman. We appreciate your attendance.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we have reports. Sorry, wrong page. My pages are all messed up. There we go. We're on to the board meeting calendar. Thank you so much. On our board meeting calendar, we have 4 items, all scheduled for October and November. On October 11, 2024, we have a curriculum committee meeting scheduled at 12:30 p.m. at the Education Service Center. And then on October 14th, we have one of our community open houses for referendum information. That's going to take place 6 p.m. at Jackson Elementary. Then our next 2 regular board meetings are scheduled for October 21 at 5:30 p.m. here at the Education Service Center, and November 4th at 5:30 p.m. at the Education Service Center. Those are the items I have on the agenda. Any additions or corrections? I'm not seeing any, so we encourage the public, though, to watch for the official time and postings as the location or date might change. Items for follow-up and communication. All right, hearing none, we've reached the end of our planned agenda. So I would move to adjourn. Is there a second? Thank you. We have a motion and second to adjourn. Any final discussion? I'll call the roll. Mr. Swigert votes yes. Mr. Donaldson? Ms. Kruger? Dr. Temez? Ms. Aragot? Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
And Ms. Lang?
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for participating remotely. We appreciate it.